I've been sitting on these games for quite a while, and I think it's finally time I did my video on Emerald Open 4, my ADV or Generation 3 draft tournament that I run with my friend Kaz. I had a okay run this time around. I mainly want to use this as a platform to talk about ADV Draft and Generation 3 in general, talk a little bit about my game, my team composition, and what I think about the format going forward. If you don't know about Gen 3 or what ADV Draft is, it is basically that. It is Draft League to its purest form. You have a set amount of points. Pokemon are tiered from all the way up at 18 all the way down to 1, and you pick a team of 8 Pokemon for 90 points. And in ADV, we're doing that with the Generation 3 metagames, so all the way up to the end of like Pokemon Emerald, Coliseum, XD Gale of Darkness, all of those games from that generation. So Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald generation, basically. And it's a very interesting generation because there are a lot of key move tutors, mechanics, and big changes that happen as a result of this generation, which make it feel super unique. So I'm going to get into some of those as they become relevant for those who are not big into ADV or Generation 3 at all. So definitely, I will make sure to cover all the things. Hidden Power is going to be a big one. We'll cover that as we go. So if you're excited for today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. We are trying to hit 1,000 subscribers this year, and every subscription is super helpful towards hitting that goal. So before we get too far, I'm going to cover the team that I drafted this time around. I had, I think, the 4th pick in this draft, and I had tried pretty much everything up to this point. I tried Zapdos. I'm pretty sure I had a T-Tar team. I think I had a Raikou team last time. I'd have to go through and check, but this time around, I wanted to use Snorlax. Snorlax is not a Pokemon I had the opportunity of using yet in Gen 3 draft, and if you know anything about Gen 3 OU, this Pokemon is one of I wouldn't say the top tier threats, it's one of the bigger threats, but in draft it is just so difficult to beat this Pokemon consistently. There's a lot less tools around for you to use to beat this Pokemon, and Curslax is just such an important threat in this metagame that, it can be really, really tough to deal with. So I wanted to use this Pokemon because I think that, if I built a team focused around getting spikes up, controlling my own hazards, I could really, really leverage the power of Snorlax and its ability to break through teams, not just with Curse, but also with the Choice Band set, for example. That's something I did use in this season or this tournament as well, which we'll get into as we go along. To pair with the Snorlax, I decided to go with Gengar as my 2nd round pick. And the reason I went with Gengar is, one, it is a rapid spin blocker. So the only way to remove hazards in this generation, which are spikes only by the way, is to use rapid spin. So ghost types are very, very critical in this format to block rapid spin and keep your hazards up. What really helps with this is one of the key mechanics that becomes important here that's not current in the current generations of Pokemon is there is no team preview. So that means when you come into the battle, you have a set lead, that Pokemon leads off, and you play the game from there, and Pokemon get revealed over time. You don't get to see your opponent's team before the start of the battle. Now, in draft, this is not going to matter terribly much, as it's a team of 6, and we, have draft teams of 8. So it's only going to be 2 Pokemon hidden, and Gengar is usually going to always be on my team. This spin blocking ghost really is effective with something like a Duskull, for example, in the back, as it can change opponents' play styles and change their behavior in game without having the Pokemon on the team. Though Gengar, it allows you to have 6 Pokemon and get the effect of the 7th in the back. Gengar is going to be here the entire time though, so that's not really going to change too much, unfortunately. But very, very good special attacker, a lot of good utility, and a really good lead. Really counters a lot of the common leads that you see in ADV. In draft and in OU in general. It's been one of my favorite OU leads of all time. The next Pokemon I wanted to try, I think at this point BKC had done a video on Moltres, and this Pokemon has gotten a lot of traction in not just Gen 3 OU and not just Gen 3 draft. It's seen a lot of interesting niche applications in Gen 9 as well. This is a Pokemon whose stock has risen just so much over the last year. I really wanted to try this Pokemon. The reason I really like this Pokemon as well is it is a Will-O-Wisper. I think Will-O-Wisp is a really, really broken move in ADV. A lot of the good Pokemon in this tier are physical attackers. So being able to have a Pokemon that can threaten high powerful, special attacks. It's got, how much does it got? 125 with 90 speed. 90 speed is very, very good in ADV, all things considered. One of the things to note is, because of the power creep, a lot of the Pokemon here are going to be a lot slower. So 90 speed, while okay in Generation 9, it's not the 100s or the 110s or even the 120s that you're looking for. 90 is pretty good, and we're going to see on a lot of the speed tiers that this Pokemon slots really nicely against a lot of the metagame. So having access to a Will-O-Wisp Pokemon, very, very crucial for me, at least, in this team to cripple Pokemon like Aerodactyl, Tyranitar, and stuff like that could be very, very problematic for my team offensively. I go next to Blastoise. Now, as I said, the only hazards in this generation are spikes. So it's going to be a lot of slower games, as we've kind of talked a lot about power creep in Generation 9. Going all the way back to Gen 3, the power level is a lot lower. So a lot of the games come down to hazards, hazard control, and there are a lot more turns, which means spikes become even more important. And with the lower quality of removers and spikers in this generation, getting good ones is of very high importance. So I go with Blastoise here. It's a bulky water, got a lot of really good utility. Refresh is a really important move to have access to. Leftovers is going to be commonly the way that a lot of these Pokemon regain HP. So having Refresh to prevent being toxic, and then sit on Pokemon to get that leftovers recovery is going to be really, really crucial. Water and ice coverage is actually pretty good from this Pokemon. It's only got 85 special attack, but that's enough to threaten common threats like Salamence with Ice Beam, and then put pressure on Pokemon, common ground types like Donphan is one that you might see. That is a Rapid Spinner as well. So bulky water on this team and Rapid Spinner. We have 2 immunities to Rapid Spin, or not to Rapid Spin, to Spikes right now. But with Snorlax, we really want to make sure we keep spikes to a minimum against this team, because we want that Pokemon to come in without leftovers as much as possible. We get probably the premier spiker in this format, though. In Gen 3 ADV, probably for the price point and the value, Glalie is probably your best spiking option to have access to, which is, I wouldn't say surprising, but, the main reason that this is the case is it has spikes and explosion, which is really, really useful. Allows you to set up spikes early. 80 special attack for Ice Beam is not the end of the world either. You can do a decent amount of damage with that too. But as I said, the main thing is going to be this explosion. It can set up light screen as well, which is super useful. It can taunt, which is good. So taunt, spikes, explosion is a very common lead for this Pokemon. To taunt the opposing spiker, set up your own spikes, and then boom on something in the late game to get a lot of damage. One of the things to note with explosion in this generation is it is what is referred to as old explosion. So if you look at this kind of text here, it halves the target's defense during damage and does 250 power worth of damage. So this move is broken in Gen 3, and that's another real reason to have a ghost type on your team, is to prevent explosion and make free explosion turns very punishable. As we get near the end of the team, I've got Primeape here. Primeape is a really, really good fighting type. It hits a nice little speed tier in 95, which helps kind of build out my speed tiers. Gengar, I'm pretty sure hits the 110. We have 110 with Gengar, 90 with the Moltres, 80 with the Glalie, and now we have 95 with Primeape. Now, one of the things I don't like about Primeape as a fighter is that it is a little weak. 65 HP, 60 defense, 70 special defense is very, very weak on the bulk side of things. But 95 speed and 105 attack is a great combination to pressure a lot of the normal types we're going to see. We'd have the Snorlax on our team, for example. This Pokemon can pressure Tyranitar, which is super important as well. Checking Choice Band T-Tar is going to be very important. Blastoise can deal damage to it, but even as a defensive wall, you don't want to take Choice Band Rock Slides by any means. So having an offensive fighting type is very important. I do prefer to have the bulkier fighting types like Machamp on my team that can come in and actually switch in more often on those Rock Slides from Tyranitar. But offensively, this does enough of the job. Next, we have the Pokemon that is referred to, quote-unquote, as the Raikou check in this format. Raikou is one of probably ADV's biggest threats, which is where its biggest differentiator between OU is that Raikou, without the ever-presence of Dugtrio as a trapper in draft, Raikou is just really, really powerful. It kind of has, that same setup potential. Calm Mind is very, very good. and there are not a lot of great checks to it, and with Dugtrio kind of not being present a lot in the metagame, really makes Raikou very, very problematic to deal with, so you have to make sure you have a check that can consistently beat the Raikou. Meganium does a really good job of that, and it's just a really good, switch into ground types in general. You'll see a lot of ground types that we play against that Meganium just completely walls down with its really good special defense and its really good physical defense as well. It's got a lot of interesting moves as well. It's got counter, which can be very, very useful. It's got synthesis, so it has reliable recovery outside of rest. It can set up both screens as well. A lot of interesting things on this Pokemon, but often you're going to use this as a Leech Seeder to come in on ground types, set up the Leech Seed, start to gain some health back, spread Toxic, and deal damage that way. I didn't have a steal on my draft, so I just spent all of my remaining points on the best steal I could find, which was Aggron. I don't like that this is a steel rock type. That does add some unfortunate weaknesses that I don't like to water, and it doubles up on the fighting weakness, which obviously not going to be super relevant on a steel anyway, but alas, something to think about. And this gives you a way to kind of pressure, with unrevealed slots, pressure the idea of freeze Toxic turns, which is really important. And then this Pokemon can also come in and walls, normal types as well. It can wall random niche bug types that can come up in this format, like Scizor or Ninjask as well. So definitely a very, very niche player. Won't really see this one often, and we actually don't bring it at all this tournament. So it's going to be the top 7 for the entirety of this team. So this is the team I brought. I think it's a really, really good combination of Pokemon for this metagame. I think Snorlax Gengar is a really, really powerful combination. And I think Moltres with the good Rapid Spinner and Glalie core gives me a really solid top 5 Pokemon to take into a lot of different matchups. We have our first game of pools here against Potato Z4. His team consists of Metagross, Tyranitar, Aerodactyl, Swampert, Flygon, Roselia, Feraligatr, and Magnemite. So interesting team. My team is on screen here. I've elected to lead Moltres in this matchup. I had the choice between that and Glalie. Glalie would be a really, really good lead into the Roselia. We can taunt and Ice Beam turn 1 and really basically nullify the effect of spikes for this entire game. But I've elected to go with Moltres here because this Pokemon leads really well into Metagross specifically. And Metagross is a Pokemon that's really, really threatening to my team. So I need to keep that Pokemon off the field for as long as possible. So we're leading with Willow, Flamethrower, Moltres. Here we have HP Grass for that Swampert. And then we have a lot of substitute on this team. This team can get really caught out by a lot of a lot of key switches on my opponent's team. So I want to leverage substitute as a way to prevent my opponent from getting aggressive on me, and I can punish those aggressive plays with substitute, meaning so I don't have to predict with the Snorlax on a Rock Slide or an Earthquake. I can set the sub up and get a big click that way, and it enables my Gengar here with sub Focus Punch as a way to attack the Tyranitar, which might be a switch in to this Gengar early on in the game. So let's get right into it. As I said, the lead in this matchup was Moltres, and my opponent does lead with the Roselia, which is a little bit unfortunate. And I make a really aggressive read here turn 1. One thing to note is we do have the Blastoise, but Blastoise turns are going to be really difficult to find here to get this Rapid Spin off. So I kind of go for the Willow here. I really am expecting a switch here into something like the Tyranitar to preserve the Roselia to set up the hazards later in the game against something like Primeape. The Meganium I have in the back, I felt like there were going to be a lot of opportunities to get hazards up and not just sack the Roselia off immediately. So I go for the burn, and then I just go for the Flamethrower here, expecting if that's their game plan, they're just going to want to sack that Pokemon off. And this is where the spikes are going to become a problem. I'm taking about 35% from this Rock Slide plus spike on Aerodactyl. If I'm not able to get this spin off here and get some, get this spin off and get some leftovers back, it's going to be really difficult to check that Pokemon long term. Luckily enough, Swampert is a really standard switch in to the Blastoise in this team, so I get the free spin off basically every time, and I can go right out into my Meganium to kind of manage this Pokemon from here. I do decide to get aggressive and go into Swampert though, or go into Snorlax rather, and just use this as an opportunity to get, really aggressive. My opponent just decides to reveal the Roar here, and this is where I decide to kind of reveal the substitute. So I go Snorlax there. I'm trying to catch something like, maybe the Metagross, maybe the Flygon. Oh, not the Flygon. Kind of maybe something random in the back here. I do go into Meganium, get roared out into Gengar, and this is where the substitute becomes really powerful because I have Focus Punch, Ice Punch, and Giga Drain. That is really good coverage for his team, but it's really hard to make a solid prediction early on in this game. So I want to get the substitute up, see if I can get that going. And my opponent does elect to switch here, maybe predicting me to drop a Giga Drain, and I go for the substitute here again. Huge turn for me as I'm able to get a free Focus Punch. Now it's going to land into the Swampert and do 16 damage, so not a lot. But we do get this behind a sub now against the Swampert and get a massive Giga Drain off on this Pokemon, putting it basically at, basically dead. And we get roared into Swampert, and at this range, pretty much every Swampert set is going to die to the Snorlax. Now, I do have to sack a lot of HP off to do that, but getting rid of this Swampert is going to be key. So we've gotten rid of the Roselia and the Swampert, and we see the Flygon get revealed. So we know the last has to basically be Metagross. I mean, it could be Feraligatr or Magnemite, but I don't have Skarmory for the Magnemite, and Feraligatr just is not as good as Metagross in this matchup. So now we know the full team, and getting rid of these Pokemon that can be used to enable switches around this team, very, very important. With Swampert down, it's going to be much more difficult to leverage turns into the Tyranitar, Aerodactyl, and Metagross. Luckily for me, my Meganium is really well designed to help out with this Flygon. With HBI specifically, it is going to be really difficult for this Flygon to make any progress against this Pokemon. Now, it is subtoxic, which is something that you're going to see a lot in ADV Draft. A really important set, honestly. And every team should really be prepared to handle subtoxic on basically everything in this tier, as this game has been pretty quick so far, but a lot of games you can kind of settle into some 50, 60 turn, 70 turn even battles, and oftentimes much more. So at this point, we're just kind of HBIcing to break the sub. If you look at the remaining Pokemon he has left, Swampert is down, the Roselia is down. Flygon's the only thing that this Meganium is going to be super useful against. T-Tar, we do have Earthquake to deal some damage and Leech Seed to get some residual, but this is kind of Dragon Dance fodder for that Pokemon, which is a little bit difficult. And that's one thing to keep in mind going into this late game, is our team is still weak to those threats in the back. So we still have to be very, very mindful that we don't lose to them. Big opportunity here for my opponent to get a flinch and have their Flygon up and get a free prediction on me. But alas, that is not going to be the case. And now this is going to be where we see our first real instance of some of the different mechanics in Generation 3 in comparison to the new generations. So in this generation, the end of the turn would happen in Gen 9, my Pokemon would die and both of our Pokemon would be dead, and we make our switch in and we play from there with unknown information. In Gen 3, the Pokemon switches in before the end of the turn, so I get to see what Pokemon my opponent goes into before I get to make my decision here as my Meganium dies to Toxic. Very, very huge for me here, as it gives me an opportunity to get Primeape in for free. And Primeape is really good into the remaining Pokemon my opponent has. Metagross, Aerodactyl do not want to switch in here, and Tyranitar definitely cannot stay in. So I get a big cross chop off there, doing about 40%. And I decide to switch into Blastoise here. I want to save this Pokemon for a very similar situation, where I sack maybe Gengar takes a lot of damage, dies to sand, and then I get my Primeape in for free on that Tyranitar. So I go here to Metagross, and I'm just going to try to use both the, between leftovers, I should be good to basically get it to a KO. I look at the calc, especially with Torrent, and at this point I kind of realize like this Pokemon's just going to die. And for some reason I switch here. I don't know what compelled me to make this switch. Blastoise basically had no use the rest of the game here, so I should have just sacked this off. I could have gone into Moltres after and just dropped a Flamethrower. Flamethrower would have been pretty good here. Gets a burn chance on Aerodactyl, kills the Metagross, gets a burn chance on Tyranitar, but I lose a Pokemon unnecessarily, which probably, this Pokemon Moltres wasn't very useful the rest of this game, but, an unnecessary risk is now I lose a chance at getting a Rock Slide miss win on one of his final two Pokemon. So right here I go for the substitute. I'm really trying to catch out a Dragon Dance here. I really think this is Dragon Dance Tyranitar in the back, given how it's been played. I figured Choice Band Tyranitar, you'd want to get that in more often to pressure something like the Blastoise. So the hidden powers keep coming out here, and given the damage at this point, I basically 100% confirm that this is Dragon Dance Tyranitar. We get another Giga Drain off, and my opponent does decide to go for the DD here. But looking at this, it is a roll to kill, and I actually do outspeed after +1. So my opponent must have hit a speed tier below. They must have been calcing me going aggressive. If I look at my speed, I'm hasty 176. So I don't have max speed. So this must have been a really, really aggressive creep on my opponent's part. Now the game is not over yet. My team is very, very weak. If this is not choice band, then Primeape can just die to hidden power. Blastoise just dies, and this is what I mean with the Moltres misplay could come into play here, is I get a chance at a Rock Slide miss to get this thing burned, and that makes, you know, Pokemon like Primeape able to chip it down. It makes Snorlax a lot less risky here. So I mean, you know, he doesn't get the flinch here, and this is, you know, if he flinches there, it's straight up over. Get the Ice Punch, this Pokemon goes down, and now I have to dodge a flinch with the Snorlax here to end the first game of pools. Very, very quick one in terms of ADV, that is for sure. And I get the kill off, and that is a 29 turn game in ADV. That is probably going to be one of the lower turn accounts that you're going to see over the course of this video, but against a team that had an insane amount of threats that were difficult for me to contend with. A big win in this first pool game of Emerald Open 4. So our second game of pools was against Tristan. His team included Zapdos, Gengar, Flygon, Blaziken, Slowbro, Smeargle, Shiftry, and Piloswine. And this game was actually streamed on the LRXC YouTube channel, so I'll put a link to that in the timestamp in the description if I remember. You get to see his reaction and commentary over this game. My team's on screen now, and this is where we start to get into the Glalie lead situation and why I think this Pokemon has such a powerful lead. We have Spike's Taunt lead, we have Taunt for the Smeargle. Smeargle lead completely shut down by Glalie lead, which is a very, very important thing. Ice Beam is a really good move to actually spam into his team. Outside of Slowbro, he doesn't have a lot of good ice switch-ins, and I can boom on the Slowbro and get a lot of damage off to enable my Gengar to threaten it out. I don't have a move for it, but I can go into like Meganium. That's one thing I looked at this team, and I kind of look back and I'm like, I don't really have a lot for the what's it called, the Slowbro offensively. There is a mistake on the team though. I don't remember which move that I changed to be self-destruct, but there is self-destruct on the Snorlax, not Slowbro, Snorlax, which is important in this game. We'll get to it when we get there. So we lead the Glalie against Smeargle, and we see basically the exact scenario that I was kind of referring to here. We get Taunt on the Smeargle, he goes into Slowbro, and we can just start getting up the spikes. My opponent reveals Focus Punch here as I go into the Meganium, which does a lot of damage, actually. Definitely not something I was like super expecting going in. We get a Leech Seed off on the Smeargle, and now this is kind of an important turn. I expect Spore to come out here. We have to pick a Spore Sack, and I elect to go into Glalie here. This gives me a free turn into my Snorlax, which yeah, not exactly. My opponent reveals Transform on the double, which is massive. So now they have a Snorlax with Return, I think it's Return, Self-Destruct, Shadow Ball, and Earthquake, and I've got a tough choice to make because I did not prepare a Snorlax switching in on my team. Now looking at this scenario, my opponent is potentially in range of Choice Banded Return. I'd have to look at the calcs again, but it is a potential, I think, kill here. So for the speed tie, I'm wondering here, I'm like, does my opponent just boom? Do they Shadow Ball predicting the Gengar on the boom? I kind of figured they might just try to boom to get as much damage with their Smeargle on anything on my team. So I make a hard read here, go into Gengar, and my opponent self-destructs in the face of Gengar. That is a huge, huge turn for the course of this game. That turn could have gone very wrong. If my opponent got aggressive and Shadow Balled, the game might have been over there. So I kind of figured they would use it to try to trade for the Snorlax, and that play pays off massively here, as my opponent now elects to bring in Shiftry as I go into Meganium, and my opponent's Sword Stance up, which is interesting. So I do actually have HP Ice and Body Slam on this, so I can actually pressure this offensively. It does 44%, not a 2-hit KO, especially not after leftovers, but I don't really care if my opponent sets up with this. So I deviate here a little bit because if I Body Slam and get the para, I can then go for the HP Ice after and kill without taking any damage. So that's why I go for the Body Slam on this turn. And now we're going to see what my opponent wants to do. Brick Break does about 70%, and I go for the HP Ice, and yeah, reveals to be a high roll that I got the first time. So I'm in a little bit of a predicament. I kind of have to decide what I want to do with this Meganium. My opponent still has a Flygon, they still have a Slowbro, in the back. So a lot there to consider. And they Leech Seed on that turn, which is, wow, what a play. I don't know if that's a good play or not. Like, I feel like still attacking there is very powerful, because a lot of the Pokemon you want to Leech Seed, like Snorlax, even the Glalie, I guess. Glalie is probably kind of the optimal scenario here. You kind of expect me to sack Glalie, so you get a little HP back. But I can still revenge you with stuff like my Gengar or like my Moltres here. So you don't really get a lot. My opponent Swords Dances here, which I assume is just to try to maximize the amount of Leech Seed that they get, and then they just kill you with Brick Break. So I'm guessing they try to take advantage of Glalie to get HP back. But I mean, this thing just gets revenge killed by the Moltres, which comes in and gets a huge burn on this Flygon. And especially with Meganium at low HP, getting a burn here is super critical. And we see another Lychee Berry Flygon here against me, which is not something I really expected going in to be a threat against my team. But it's the second time we've seen it. Now the Blastoise can just kind of wall this thing out with the burn after the substitute. The burn damage will just basically take it out here. And we've been able to get rid of both the Flygon and the Smeargle now for pretty low cost. As Shiftry comes back in, I go Meganium. I'm curious. This was an interesting double here. Not sure about this one. Going Shiftry, my answer immediately was Meganium, and Slowbro doesn't really take advantage of Meganium in this matchup, as my opponent now elects to go into the Blaziken. And this was another threat I was really concerned with, which was Sub-Salac Blaziken. I go for the Toxic here, and getting the Toxic on the Blaziken means that Sub-Salac Blaziken cannot do anything in this matchup anymore. So huge for me there. My opponent does go for the Thunder Punch on my Blastoise switch in, so great prediction there to try to get them back into this game. But this Surf is going to do a lot of damage, especially to the Zapdos coming in. That is a good chunk of damage for a Zapdos. I do stay in to get really aggressive, trying to Ice Beam this Zapdos down. I don't really need the Blastoise as much here to end this game. The combination of Gengar and Moltres will be able to handle the rest of my opponent's team. If I can just put this in range of either of those Pokemon, it makes the subsequent turns a lot easier. They go for the T-Wave though, probably trying to predict an aggressive switch, maybe into Meganium, though I don't really expect Meganium to have come in here or to be really affected by the Thunder Wave. My opponent then reveals Thunder, which is interesting. I'm not really sure the rationale behind that. And then they reveal one of my favorite sets in Gen 3, Drill Peck Zapdos. Love Drill Peck Zapdos. I've run a lot of Choice Band Zapdos sets in the past in OU. I think it's not good, but it's, you know, certainly an interesting application, as we see HP Fighting come out here from the Zapdos as Choice Banded Return just blows this Pokemon back, absolutely destroying it. Now at this point, I kind of expected counter or something, you know, ridiculous like that. I at this point I didn't really want to play around with the Slowbro, so I just go into my Gengar, go for the Toxic on this Pokemon, and sack off my Gengar. Now Calm Mind Rest Slowbro is a problem here, and now this thing is actually in range of the return, which is super important. So my opponent is just going to elect to sack off the Shiftry here. Another Slowbro is in a little bit of trouble here between the Poison and the Spike. It's going to be really difficult to position that Pokemon in. My opponent elects a Sky Uppercut here and not Thunder Punch. I don't think Thunder Punch would have actually saved them here with my extra Sensory on Moltres. I think this would have just been revenge killed either way by my, this Pokemon would have been revenge killed either way by the Moltres. So we see another Paralyze come here. I mean, it doesn't really matter, as it does reveal to be Salacberry. So we get around another threat that my opponent has. And now they have Last Mon Slowbro. I just try to protect just to stall this thing out with the Poison. I kind of expect that my team should be able to handle it from here. I go for the double protect here, really trying to get that Poison damage racked up. You might be wondering, why have I not ended the video? Well, I mean, it's because we have Rest, or ended this battle. We have Rest, so it has Resto Chesto on my Blastoise, and is now back to full HP, and I've got to go to Moltres here. I do expect this Calm Mind to start up, and I need to set up a Toxic. What I'm looking to set up here on this is a Self-Destruct from my Snorlax on this Pokemon. So I got to start Toxic stalling this thing down, force it into a scenario where it has to rest. My opponent goes for the Focus Punch here, really trying to catch that Snorlax, kind of lacking there. I go into Blastoise here and just sack this Pokemon off. I only need one Pokemon left for this to be, for this plan to be effective here. So now I can go into the Moltres. This is taking a lot of toxic damage. I go for the Protect. My opponent goes for another Calm Mind here. They're at 40%, and they're getting to the point where, even the double Protect doesn't seal it, But if they attack and kill this, then I can just outspeed and kill with return. So I'm pretty okay with that. And now they go for the rest here. And with my 1 Pokemon free and the 2 sleep turns, I'm able to get in my Snorlax for free and get the explosion off to win this game. And that is basically going to confirm my next step in the tournament onto brackets. But we've got one more game of pools before we get there. So now that we're 2-0, we're in a really good position. And while we don't necessarily have to win this game, having a higher seed will give us a better chance to make it out of the bracket stage. So still a pretty important battle here. My opponent's team has Swampert, Blissey, Regice, Houndoom, Quillfish, Ludicolo, Flygon again, and Banette. Now, there's a little bit here to be mindful of that makes this matchup a little bit difficult. One, my team does not have the best ways of handling Regice in this team, which kind of seems odd, but that's a Pokemon. If the wrong Pokemon goes down at the wrong time, that can be a really difficult Pokemon to handle with in this game. Blissey is also a Pokemon that I really struggle to break down. So Spit-F walls do a really good job against my team unless I can really position my Snorlax correctly. We do have lead Gengar here, which is actually really good against this team, because one thing that's also really frustrating about this matchup is Houndoom is really good against my team. Really good against Glalie lead, really good against Meganium, and it's good against Gengar. I do have ways that I can play around it, and we do have modest Gengar here with Destiny Bond to hopefully give us a chance there, but this is going to be probably a really tough game and a really tough matchup. So I lead the Gengar into the Houndoom, and my opponent just switches out immediately on the Destiny Bond here. So we revealed our Destiny Bond tech early, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we kind of had to in that early game. So right here, I use my Glalie to get up a free spike as the Banette goes for the Will-O-Wisp. I kind of expect a Fire Blast there, so I just go into Snorlax, try to get a free turn here to pressure the Swampert as much as we can. Kind of expected Banette, honestly, to come in there and eat a Shadow Ball here after a spike, but a good play to go into Swampert here. So Houndoom, I've been trying to, sequence a turn or two to get some damage on that. That Pokemon staying healthy in the back, very, very problematic in this early game. We still have the Meganium here as a great way to answer the Swampert. This is one of the better Swampert answers in ADV Draft, as we see the counter come out there, trying to use counter to catch my Snorlax lacking here in this game. And then another Pokemon which turns out to be really frustrating and really does a good job of walling my team is this Meganium, or is this Ludicolo. So I do have HP flying actually on this Meganium, and this is where, as we get frozen here, which is super unfortunate by the way, this is where we saw it with the T-Tar earlier, but we see hidden power mechanics come into effect here in a key way. So hidden power in this game, the physical special split is a thing in Gen 3 in the sense that it is based on typing in this generation. So flying is a physical type, fire is a special type, for example. Hidden power follows that same logic that it is, physical or special based on the typing. So this is actually a physical attack here coming from my Meganium. So interesting thing to note, you saw that on T-Tar with Dragon Dance Tyranitar had hidden power. That is because hidden power is a physical move for the physical types in this generation. Important to note. This freeze though, wow. Talk about real frustration here. Gonna get a free turn into the Houndoom, and I am just on the back foot. This Pokemon is so crucial to being able to put pressure on Ludicolo and Swampert. I have to go and try to get aggressive into my Snorlax. If I get burned there, the game is just assuredly over. I get a big return here. It does 31%, which is not a lot, but I need to start getting this Pokemon weak, forcing turns where I can get Meganium to wake up. And with the the combination of Roar and these switches into his aggressive threats, I just don't have a good position here to get that going. So right here, I make an aggressive play here into my Gengar. I gotta leverage my Gengar here somehow to take advantage of this team. My opponent goes into the Banette, takes about 52%, and my opponent goes for the Endure. As I go for the Ice Punch, I go for the Ice Punch here just as a way to protect against the Flygon trying to get aggressive and come back in. It also allows me to deal damage to the Swampert as well, which could switch in to try to take a T-Bolt and get a Giga Drain out of my Gengar to go into Houndoom. So like here, pretty frustrating, as I'm just going to go into the Snorlax to eat the Shadow Ball, and I get a free chance with my Snorlax to click a move. I do double out here into the Moltres. I want to predict Destiny Bond. I think Destiny Bond is a very likely way for this set to round out and as a way to handle the Snorlax. That then gets predicted, and we're able to go for a Toxic as we eat a Shadow Ball onto the Manette, playing around that Destiny Mon and getting our first kill in the game. But this frozen Meganium is just such a problem in this matchup, not able to get a Leech Seed up and get some health back, and losing so many turns here as a result of this freeze. And Regice is able to come in, and with Substitute, this is where Regice becomes a real problem for my team. Substitute Regice is just such a brutal Pokemon. And now this is where we see another interesting mechanic with Explosion. Oh my god, I went back to the first turn. Hold on. Let me get back to the turn. Alright, so we're back at the turn. This is where we see an interesting mechanic with Explosion, as the turn ends when you explode. So I'm then able to get in my Moltres in this situation without this Pokemon sub up for free. And Moltres is really, really good in this spot. I have HP Grass to cover off the Swampert. There is a Spike Up which pressures the Houndoom. Still, it could be Flash Fire, you know, for all I know at this point. But this gives me a really, really good turn as my opponent does go into Houndoom. I go for the Toxic, try to get some pressure on this Pokemon. If I get even a little bit more chip, then I'm able to kill it with Gengar, but missing the Toxic just is kind of a dagger, honestly, in this game. And I just get HP rocked out of the game here. Wow, what a set to bring here. Great bring by my opponent's part to put HP rock Houndoom and just completely blow back my Moltres. Moltres has been going through it to start this tournament, that is for sure. I'm able to bring in my Primeape, go for a Protect, try to get something going, see what my opponent wants to do. And at this point, the game is starting to fall away a little bit. Now, good news here, my opponent goes for the Leech Seed on my Substitute, so I'm able to get that play right, get a Toxic off, and use Sub-Toxic Primeape of all things. This is what I mean, Sub-Toxic is such a relevant, you know, part of this metagame that, you know, it's just super popular in this metagame, even on Pokemon like Primeape that are not necessarily defensive. Great tool to break down Pokemon like Ludicolo, which I might otherwise struggle with offensively in this situation. Now, the Giga Drain is a very, very good tool to kind of combat this, as my opponent then gets a free turn into Flygon as I set up the Substitute, and I only have Brick Break as coverage move, so it's not really going to help, and that Rock Slide is still going to break through my Substitute. So while I am getting some Toxics off here, not having a Meganium that is unfrozen and not having the Toxic on the Houndoom is going to make this game really difficult to win here from the end game. I try to go into here into my Meganium to see, I got to be able to unfreeze and unthaw at some point. Like, I got to get a Leech Seed off here or something. I do use this to get a doubled out into Gengar on the Regice, and this is just a nightmare scenario. That's a free Substitute. And I don't really have the counterplay around free Substitute at this point. I can Brick Break the Regice, but this Ice Beam is going to kill. And at this point, I don't really have the tools left over to break the remaining Pokemon my opponent has. I try to get really aggressive on a double there, and they Substitute predicting the explosion. And that is the nail in the coffin in this game. We're going to go on for a few more turns, but this is a big game for Regice here. Just kind of locking this one up as we expect. I think this is a Substitute. No, they just go for the Ice Beam to kill. And Snorlax is not going to be able to pull this one out the bag the rest of the way, that's for sure, as he actually is faster and then booms on me. So, Frozen Meganium versus Houndoom. I think we all know how this one ends, and that is a big loss. Not necessarily the most relevant thing, as we are off into the next round of pools. We are in the bracket stage at this point, but an unfortunate loss, a little bit of hacks, but I think this was one of those volatile matchups with Regice, especially when it revealed to be Substitute. That was always going to be an uphill battle. So with our 2-1 record, we are off to the bracket stage, and we get a really tough round 1 opponent. This is why I mentioned the idea of, you know, going 3-0 gives you a little bit of a better round 1. We're playing Zio Trip here, very well-known Smogon player. That is one of the things to know with this tournament. In a lot of draft tournaments, there's a draft community that generally plays in a lot of them. Smogon is where a lot of them are hosted nowadays. In ADV and the Emerald Open, you see a lot of Smogon advanced players mainly play in it. It's a little bit of an odd community, kind of a combination of a few. So really tough matchup to get here in terms of the player perspective. Their team consists of Zapdos, Gengar, Flygon, Registeel, Glalie, Tauros, Slowbro, and Chinchou. Another Flygon. I don't know what it is with Flygon. This Pokemon is unusable, and I've played 3 in this tournament. I don't get it. But this is my team on screen now. It's kind of a tough matchup. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here. Tauros is really powerful. in this matchup. They have their own Glalie as well, which is pretty powerful. Not really a lot to note of here. There is kind of a build mistake, I think. I did include HP Fire Meganium, which at the end of the day, I think it was for Registeel. I just don't think that's really an effective move to have. Would have been nice to have another move there. But let's get right into this battle. This is going to be a really big one, as I said. Really, really good player and a tough matchup. I lead my Glalie into their Gengar, and they get a first turn burn. So that's really tough. I am just going for the Ice Beam there. Rather than setting up the hazards, I'm trying to pressure this Gengar, get as much damage as I can. The Gengar mirror can be a little bit difficult to kind of prep for. It kind of, do you go for the bulk to live the hit? Do you try to game the speed? A lot kind of going on here to manage this Gengar kind of mirror match situation here. My Gengar is really, really powerful in this matchup. Ice Beam or Ice Punch does, a lot of damage to Flygon. Psychic does a lot of damage to the opposing Gengar. And then Thunderbolt is, good coverage move in general for the Slowbro and could deal general damage, but their Gengar is going to be a lot more threatening to deal with my Pokemon on my team. So getting this early chip and then getting my own Gengar is going to be pretty important. And I get my first spike up. They don't have a spinner, so that spike is going to be up for the rest of the game. And that Pokemon actually is in range for my Psychic at 76%. You just need a little bit of chip. So trading some chip to get that Gengar in range of my own Gengar, very, very massive. And this is where the game, we're going to, kind of get your popcorn ready. We're going to be in for a little bit of a while on this one. There's going to be a lot of switching, a lot of Leech Seed turns here, as my opponent does elect to get Gengar back in on the Meganium, and then go right back into Zapdos on my Protect. Now, I expect something like a Drill Peck. They go for the substitute here. I would have really liked to have something like HP Ice in this spot. HP Fire was kind of designed for Registeel, but it's not doing enough. HP Ice would have been really good to prevent Zapdos from setting up free substitutes on my Meganium, and now I have to take damage on my Zapdos, or damage on my Snorlax, for example, to break these substitutes. My opponent goes for the Thunder Wave, or the Thunderbolt. I'm able to get a big Body Slam para here, actually, which is super massive. Opens up a 2-hit KO with my Snorlax on that Zapdos, and I just go for the Shadow Ball here. I'm always trying to protect against the Gengar, keep that Pokemon from coming in as much as possible, where it's at the HP now to be killed by my own Gengar. So in comes Registeel. This Pokemon is going to be consistently a problem in this matchup. I go for the Earthquake. I fall for the bait. I fell for it. I've done so well this entire tour to not fall for a counter bait like that, and Registeel is the one that gets me here. Really should have played around that, especially with Meganium. No reason to play into that counter bait. At that point, a free switch into Meganium would have been so huge. But I do get my Primate in. And while it is starting to look a little bit bad, I do have sub Selakberry, which actually does a lot of work in this matchup. So it puts me in a decent position. If I'm able to use this Pokemon to pick off of this Registeel, I'm able to get a few other Pokemon. Gengar still has a really, really good opportunity to win in the late game with its coverage. So I'm keep going for the substitute, trying to get the Selak situation to work out for me. And I figured at this point he was going to switch. I make a big call that that Zeo was switching here. And I go for the cross chop. This was in range 2, and I missed. And in the comments, I'm going to move the video over. I don't think you can see it. Kaz just typed smoked in the chat, and that's the nail in the coffin right there. If I'm able to get that cross chop off, we have a really, really good game on our hands. Now, that is a little bit defeatist. There's still a lot that can go right in this game. Blastoise still does a good job walling this Pokemon. And I am able to put pressure on the Flygon as it comes in, get my Meganium in. As we see another substitute, HP Ice, as I said, huge in this spot for Zapdos and Flygon. I wouldn't have just been completely behind the 8-ball here. So a little bit of poor prep on my part, leading to a scenario where I'm super weak to Zapdos and Flygon. But at this point, I still feel like I do have outs to this game. I do have Refresh on my Blastoise, so I'm able to not get stalled out by this Pokemon. 33% is a lot, but if I get the right roll here, I am still in business, and it is a good roll in my favor. As in comes the Registeel, obviously going to eat this Ice Beam all day, but I'm going to have to get aggressive here. I'm going to take a free switch into Meganium, hope to get something going here. I maybe could have gone to Primate there, but considering how low it was, not really going to be helpful. And this is what I mean. Like, I'm going for Leech Seed instead of HP Fire anyway against this Pokemon, and this HP Fire is not even going to do anything relevant. So We get back into Blastoise here, really trying to get some HP back with this Leech Seed so we can use this Pokemon even further into the late game against stuff like the Tauros and the Flygon. In comes the Slowbro, and like as I said, these turns are looking really good for me. We're able to get this Registeel basically dead after, you know, Leech Seed and, you know, basically after Leech Seed and Spikes, and this is where, as I said, I keep harping on that HP Ice point, but HP Ice would have been such a game changer in this game, where Registeel has basically died just by the purpose of existing in this matchup. So Hidden Power is going to come out here, not very effective, probably HP Ice here on the Blastoise, and they're going to bring in their Slowbro. And Slowbro, you know, at this point I'm running out of Pokemon to kill with, but if you look at their team, like their team is still very, very weak at this point, and Gengar and Primeape still have the ability to pull this game up if I play my cards right. Really have to lock in and get these next couple of plays right. Registeel is going to come in, basically sack itself off at this point to the Leech Seed. And, you know, we're at a decent amount of HP, but this gives a free turn for Gengar, and Gengar is just really difficult for me to do anything against. I'm able to get a Leech Seed off. Once again, I really want to keep that Pokemon in range of my own Gengar at this point to be able to kill. And I do save the Meganium. I probably should have just sacked it off at that point. It really wasn't providing any value. I think what I was trying to do was get, you know, a free turn here, hoping to catch my opponent making a misplay and get some free HP back on the Blastoise. But this Gengar is pretty low at this point, and they go into Flygon. I go for the Protect. Maybe I should have gotten more aggressive and clicked a Leech Seed there to cover for this Flygon, as they're going to get a free substitute, as I am going to have to really hope for a good roll here on my Blastoise to make sure that I can get an Ice Beam off against this Pokemon after it goes behind a sub, and that does not look like it's going to be the case here. My opponent does elect to go for another substitute as I just sacked this off, though. Kind of a desperation play. I'm basically out of it at this point. They might have predicted me to go Gengar to predict that, but you know, this does put me in range here. I'm still in range, but I get the live and we kill the Flygon. So the Tauros in the back, though, this is still the massive problem with this game. I don't have a way to handle Tauros now. I've taken so much damage on this Pokemon. I don't have a way to get my Select Berry on my Primeape against any of my opponent's Pokemon. And at this point, there's not really an out that's going to be effective against my opponent's team. I have to hope maybe that their choice band. You see my EV spread. I do live there. They are faster, and I do pick off that Gengar. And in comes the Tauros, and it's going to be HP Ghost all the way here to finish this one off. I go into Meganium to get the sack. I try to go Tauros as a last-ditch effort. Maybe for some reason it doesn't kill, but it's always going to kill. And that is the end of the Emerald Open 4 for me. We lose to Zeo Trip. Great game. You know, very, very strong Smogon player. You know, by all means, amazing player, and you know, certainly deserving of the victory. So, not a very exciting run, honestly. 4 games. I want to get these games out there, though, because I think this team was very interesting, and I want to bring as much Gen 3 draft content as possible, not only to this channel, but to YouTube in general. I know I did the streams, which were very exciting back when we did those during the pool play for Emerald Open. Definitely going to do those again next year as well. And I'm going to be covering, maybe some historical games from that tour. A lot of those are kind of dead because of the Sorrel replay thing, though, unfortunately. So we really only had Emerald Open 4 replays left. So I might go through a lot of cool games over the next couple of weeks from this tournament. Not just my own, but from other players as well. Because I think there's a lot of cool things that happen in this tour. It's one of my favorite things to do in the draft community, is to run this tournament every single year. So if you're interested in this tournament, I'll link the Discord down below. It is every March time is usually when we start applications, March, February, and March, April, May is when the tournament happens. So, not going to be for a while, but if you want to join the Discord server, join the ADV Draft community, I would really recommend it. It's an awesome format. It's a great, change of pace from modern and contemporary Draft League. So if you made it all this way, make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. As I said, my goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers this year. I really think we can do it. I'm really excited about all the content we've been doing so far this year and all the content we have coming forward. So that's all for today. I will see you next time. And as always, have a wonderful day.